All right, welcome to our video looking at completing an activity diagram. So an activity diagram is a UML diagram. It's still very much a behavioral diagram, but it's the next level of decomposition from our use case diagram, which we looked at previously, and you can see on screen at the moment. So an activity diagram is where we shift the thinking away from the users and how they use the solution to start thinking about what activities do we need to, think about developing and coding within the solution for these use cases to be able to occur. So the reason why we look at using an activity diagram is, again, as we said, it's the next level of decomposition. It gives us that bridge from our use case down to our algorithms. And when we start to think, a bit more in terms of the actual code and those processes that we need to generate. So similar to when we created our use case diagram, we're going to create a new model. So, a new diagram. So model, add diagram, and the one we would like is activity diagram. So you can see with the activity diagram, we have a few different elements. So the main one being the action. So what is the activity that we wish to occur at that point in the process? Excuse me. We also have an initial and a final. So where the activity begins and where it finishes. Right? So this is going to have a bit more of a linear order compared to our use case diagram, where we're considering things very independently of each other. We also have a couple of more advanced elements. So we have a fork, so where we have a situation where multiple things can happen in parallel without one impacting the other. We can branch out using a fork, and we can bring back those parts using a join. So where we have more than one thing that can happen at the same time, we use a fork and a join. An emergent decision of what we use for, like it says, making decisions. So these are going to very heavily tie into our if statements that we look at going forward into our algorithms. And then you'll notice there's only one connection for the activity diagram, the control flow. So this just shows the order that the activities will be run in. So there is two different schools of thought around activity diagrams. Some people like to have the whole, system in a single activity, and they can end up with multiple sort of activities running in parallel. My personal preference and the decision or the direction I would recommend everyone going in is to create an activity diagram for each use case. So we want to treat each of these things independently. So if we break down each of these in their own activity, first of all, it's a lot easier to handle, smaller parts of the system, while still being able to, be able to piece it all together at the end as part of this system. And also, I guess, it's not always a case of people always adding due dates and then viewing them and then getting reminders. These all happen at different times. So again, these activities are probably independent of each other to begin with. So rather than having a big, fork and join in our activity diagram, we can consider each one separately, and we'll have a few simpler activity diagrams rather than one, complex, convoluted diagram. So we'll look at the activity diagram for view due dates. It's probably one of the simpler ones, to be fair. So again, it's all about showing you how to do this. You can obviously go and apply that your particular circumstance. So we always start off with our initial and our final. Again, these can move around as we need. Try to actually line them up to begin with. As a general rule, initial goes at the top, final goes at the bottom, because that makes logical sense. And then our actions go in there. So if we start thinking about what's involved in that process of viewing the due dates. All right, so we might start off with something like the user logging in. Or yeah, so we'll call it user login. It's the activity that we need to develop for the system. So they log in to it. So we're getting, making sure that it's their information that we're providing. So display due dates for user. Actually, we don't need for user, that's getting a bit detailed. So display due dates. All right, and so then once that's displayed, we might want to give them some of those other options we already talked about. So this is an opportunity for us to use the fork and the join. So just draw the fork in there. So this bar just represents, there's going to be one input with a few outputs. And so in this case, we might have the action to add due dates, check off completed. So this is starting to actually quickly turn into a full activity diagram for all of the use cases, I suppose. But again, we could turn these options on and off. So actually what we might do, this will give us an opportunity to look at the merge and decision. So I'm just going to slide that down a bit and have a decision rather. So it's just a little diamond shape, you'll see when we draw it. Actually, so what we might do is branch it out this way. And in here, use the type. So depending on whether they're a student or a parent, we'll give them the options. So as a student, we want them to be able to add the due date or check if they're completed. Is there anything else we want them to do? Think about it. Yeah, so tasks and some dates. Yep, so reminders is going to be an automatic thing. All right. And so if they're not a student, which would obviously mean they're a parent, they're not actually going to be given that option of doing anything. So let's put in the other pieces and we'll connect it all up and it'll start to make hopefully a bit more sense. So our user logs in. Actually, just to incorporate the last one. Oh, actually, this is probably where we could have done the if statement, but we've already got one in there. So again, to stretch things up a bit. We can always move it again later. So decision needs to be made. Actually, I've done that the wrong way around, haven't I? So is there reminders? Or are there reminders is probably correct English. All right, so depending on whether there is or isn't, Now we might display the reminders. If not, we're just going to skip through to displaying the due dates. Alright, so let's start connecting all this up. So we start, the user logs in, we find out if there's any reminders. So this goes into the decision. Alright, as we connect to the display reminders, that's going to be the yes decision. And this is just the no decision. Alright, so once we've displayed the reminders, we're going to display all the due dates anyway. And then we're going to get the user type in there. So again, another decision to be made. And the first decision is based off if they're a student. We might give them the option of adding in any other due dates that they might have. Also, they can check off anything that's completed. That's a little bit. It's always hard with these ones because you've got to get in the shape, and being the fork and join bars are quite small, it can be a little bit fiddly. There we go, got there eventually. All right, so you can see with the fork and the join, it basically says, well, do either of those things, but when they're both done, we're pretty much done with that. So come back to our join. And the other option is, well, if it's a parent, well, then we don't really have anything at all. Although I just realised I am missing that should be a process. So well, it's going to be the updated due dates, but it'll be the same activity. So so you might notice we've got the same activity in there twice, and that's totally okay. Because I guess with the parent, it's where they are. With the students, once they've adapted and changed, we update it and display those updated due dates for them. All right, so again, we can spend a little bit of time trying to make this look a bit nicer and more ordered. Although it's not too bad. Maybe shrink that down this way a bit. All right, so I guess this one being a pretty simple example, you can sort of see we've managed to include everything there in the one activity. We could break down some of these further. So, for example, the user login, we could look at the whole process of if their credentials are valid or invalid, what we want to do. And you can start to see how this gets away from us pretty quickly. So, I guess what we might do is maybe have a look at these a bit more broken down. Well, let's do just maybe display due dates. So actually, before we do that, we'll save our work. So export our diagram. So I'll call this main activity diagram. So new diagram activity. So actually might do the add due dates one. That's probably a little bit more complex, a little bit more to it. Again, so start off with the initial and the final. All right, so we need to think about what we're doing when we're adding due dates. So We need to get input the information. So the first thing we need to do is get the user input. So maybe we should say user input information. And then what we would generally do is we display the user's input for them to confirm the details. So if you've ever filled in an online form, you put in the form, press submit, and it'll usually give you a rundown of what you've just said to confirm. All right, so what we can say here is confirm input. All right, and this is where we would have a decision being made. And if everything is good to go, didn't mean to do that. Add data to system. All right, so just get the control flow going in there. So the user inputs their information. So this is the due date we want to add. We display that on the screen. We get them to confirm, is this the input that you want into this decision? So if that's a yes, we will add the data to the system, and that's where it ends off. If it's a no, oh, well, what we'll do is we'll probably double back to the input information. Just need to bend that around the corner. So this one creates a little bit of a loop in the sense of if we're not happy with the input, we just want to go back to the start, get them to re-put in the information. But if they do, then we're set. And so as always, you can adjust it a little bit. That no is a bit too close to the line there for my liking. But when we're happy with that, same as usual, save, export diagram. So this was the add data activity. All right, so as you can see, we can do that for any and all of these. Obviously, you get to a point where it's starting to get quite pedantic. That's when we probably are looking at doing algorithms anyway, and this becomes more of an algorithm flow chart rather than an activity diagram. So again, activity diagrams are quite behavioral, not structural, so we don't have to get into the nitty-gritty specifics at this point. This is probably about the level we want to get to. You can see the wording is very much like an action, so display, confirm, add, and then that object that we're interacting with. So the user input or the data in the system. In this case, the due dates, the reminders, those sorts of things. All right, so that's an activity diagram. Thank you very much for watching.